Welcome to the Kent Lapp Podcast.
Jamie George, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Kent. Great to be with you.
Great name. Do you find your name is strong, Jamie George?
You know what's funny is I did a lot of orphan work overseas, and it seems like when I went internationally, they always got a kick out of my name. It was funny to them.
Okay. What was funny about it?
I don't know. I wish I should go back and ask
Because of the
them.
rhyme a little bit?
Maybe I often got, isn't that like two first names?
Okay.
And they like to call me both names at the same time, and it was really fast.
Okay.
Jamie George.
Jamie George.
So it turned into kind of James George.
Yeah.
Yeah. When another interesting thing, when I went to college my freshman year, I remember my RA walked into my room and he's like, "What's your name?" And I was like, "Jamie George." He was like, "Yeah, you're a punk, huh?" I'm like, "What? Huh?" And he's like, "What's your real name?" I'm like, "Here's my driver's license."
Yeah. I like it. Certain names just kind of roll off the tongue nicely, you know? I feel like Jamie George is one of those.
Well, thank you.
The thing I have
got
to work...
lots of other issues, so I'll take that one.
I'm sure. The thing I have to work with is like I'm Kent Lapp, but if you kind of have to like Kent Lapp, you know what I mean? And it's like
yes.
if people know me, it's like my name is Kent Lapp. That rolls off the tongue. But if you kind of get stuck on like Kent Lapp, it's like a little too punctuated. You know what I mean?
I love that.
Now, one thing I didn't know until this morning is that you're from Buffalo, New York.
Yes,
I'm from
and
just south of Rochester.
I was going to say, I absolutely hear a northern tone in your voice. Yeah, I was going to ask you, okay, so where in the north are you from?
Yeah, from New York State.
Wow.
How old were you when you moved out of Buffalo?
There for 18 years, went off to,
Oh, wow.
yeah, I didn't leave till I was in college.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I went off to college in Virginia, came back for 2 years, moved to Miami for 3 years, St. Louis for 8 years, been in Nashville for 15 years.
Wow, that's a lot of years.
Yeah.
How old are you?
50.
You're 50 years
Yeah,
old.
Yeah.
You look like you're 41.
Thank you. I'll take that.
You hear that a lot?
Yes.
You must. You're 50 years old.
Yeah, 50.
Wow. There was an article in, what was the name of it? The Sonoma Christian Home in 2015. I want to ask you this, that titled you as a progressive pastor. What does that mean? What,
Good question. I never
what
saw the
in
article.
2015? Why would they say progressive pastor? What does that mean?
Who knows what it means to whoever wrote it.
Yeah.
If I had to surmise back in 2015, I suppose when I was pastoring, the church we were pastoring met in an old factory, so we didn't have a traditional space. I often talked about my struggles. So
Okay.
I grew up my dad was a school teacher who became a counselor, who became a pastor.
Okay.
And in the pastoral, he really stayed in the counseling space as a pastor. So I'm a pastor's kid, but my dad wasn't like the lead guy.
Mm-hmm.
So he was on staff actually 44 years. There's a story there.
Wow.
So I kind of grew up around the world of psychology and education. So as a result of both of those two sciences, I've always had this love of learning. And I've also had a resistance to being right, which sometimes in a Christian or theological framework creates a bit of tension because I kind of start most places with, I mostly don't know anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always been a bit of a mystic and embraced the mystery of God, and that's been maybe for some people comforting, for others unnerving. So I don't know, whatever the progressive term was there.
Maybe that's some of the things behind the...
I also led with, I talked about my struggles a lot.
Yeah.
I was a pastor's kid. I never wanted to be a pastor. Not in a million years. I did youth ministry for 13 years. That was cool. But for 4 years, I kind of kicked against this sense. In the old days, we called that a calling. But just a kind of this inner thing that we were supposed to plant a church and see if we could do something differently. And, but I just felt like, I heard Jordan Peterson say this recently. He said, divergent thinking is a blessing and a curse because the curse is that you can't catalyze around an identity. And there's a real, and people who are creative thinkers or open thinkers are constantly referencing kind of across the sciences.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very much how I see the world. So locking into kind of one doctrinal kind of thought or one dogmatic stance or one theological position was always difficult for me. That would probably be another reason.
Yeah, so I think we have a mutual friend in Patrick Miller.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he and I have talked a fair bit about a couple of times is kind of that idea on like the need for certainty in certain, I don't know, cultures, traditions maybe. And there was a fair amount of certainty kind of built into the tradition that he and I kind of grew up. We kind of shared similar. So what are your thoughts on, I mean, some of the things that we've talked about is, the focus. So here's the thing. I mean, some things are non-negotiable, right, in the Christian faith. I mean, there's a few things we know for sure, Jesus is God is one of those things that we know. And, but then there's other things where maybe sometimes we rush to certainty way too quickly and kind of make that a thing, kind of a dividing ground and so forth, when maybe the focus should be less on certainty, less often and more on growth and relationship and those types of things.
Yeah.
Understanding, so is that kind of what you mean when you say kind of the certainty thing?
Yeah. That's funny. When I read the Bible, I don't see anything pointing towards certainty. I never saw, there's no kind of examples of Jesus sitting with his followers and being like, I need you guys to pull out your notebooks. These are 5 points. I need you to get these down, lock them in. There even seems to be an evolving understanding of who God is. Jesus seems to be having that himself, an evolving understanding. At 12 years old, he knew something he didn't know at 8. At 30, he knew something he didn't know at 12. There's an evolving understanding of the planet, of what life is like. Paul even seems to have an evolving understanding of theology as he writes it. I don't know many people who believe the exact same thing they believed 20 years ago. They might pretend they do or have language around it, but most people are evolving and growing in their understanding of God. That seems consistent with me as I read the Bible, so I don't see it as static.
Yep.
I see it as coming to life, as alive and full of energy.
Yeah.
So for me, the Bible's kind of an investigation on the structure of being. It's not a moral handbook that I'm meant to live my life by. And now I grew up in some of that too, where certain people and they would use this phrase a lot, well, the Bible says, and I would say, well, the Bible says according to who? Because as soon as you got done quoting, it turned into commentary.
Yeah.
So you're giving me your perspective of the Bible based on perhaps you grew up in the West, perhaps you grew up in the East, right? Your culture of origin. If you grew up in Western New York, you see the world a little differently than you do if you grew up in Alabama.
Yep.
I married a girl from Alabama. I know this personally. So like, I mean, you come in with your cultural nuances, with your family of origin inclination. So let's just be honest about the fact that we come in with prejudices and then have a spirit of humility as we enter into a dialogue on an investigation of being, which to me, the Bible's mostly stories and poetry and history. That's mostly what it is. But we've tried to condense it down into some rules or some laws. And I think the spirit of Antichrist is when people have taken the Bible to try and turn it into a control mechanism for power over authority. That's where I see most of the damage done. So I've been in it for 50 years. Like I started at minus 9 months. I've been I was like baby Jesus. I was this. We were at Easter pageants. I hung on the cross. I wasn't Jesus.
Yep.
Nor was I the guy who went to heaven. I was the one who went to hell, the thief. But I've been in it my whole life.
Yep.
And the damage that I see is usually done in a religious context by people who want some kind of control, authority, or power over.
Sure. And then they're using the Bible
as their
as
sword.
sort of the sword.
And they love that analogy.
Sure.
Too.
To accomplish what they want to accomplish and the things they want to accomplish and the dominion they want to set up, the world they want to kind of create and have dominion over.
Yeah, well said, yes.
Yeah, and you see that in that's a pretty big point actually. And that is putting, really what you're doing at that point is you're putting man in the center and then you're using God as a means to your own ends, as opposed to building your life around Jesus Christ himself.
I would often say, when I was a pastor, I would often say, hey, I don't know if this is true. Like, you have to test and hold and see if what I'm about to say to you resonates. Listen to the Spirit, and I'm convinced that the Imago Dei, the image of God, is printed on all of humanity. So we are already loved. This is a love story. You're already loved. I think it's our ego that wants to try and be exclusive and say some people aren't, and try and have a degree of moral superiority, like your sin's worse than mine, and tries to, and even in our good days, I think our ego's like, I got to do something to prove that I'm good enough.
Yes.
And the scandalous part of the true love story of Christ is that you're actually already loved. So what if you wake up every day, you roll out of bed and you go, so today I'm already loved by the divine, full stop. That's not a bad way to start the day.
Yeah. It's not, but you want other people to like you too. Like I deal with that, you know, like I deal with a little bit of performance, like need for performance, you know, like I get that. Here's where I struggle with. I don't struggle with, I got to perform in order for God to love me. Like that's not something I feel
it's not
fairly
this
secure.
way, right.
It's not that way.
Here.
But I feel like if
around.
I feel around. So if I don't, and I guess when you come back to it, that's I guess that's a misunderstanding or misappropriation of the, because here's the thing. If God, the creator of all things, the divine, loves me, that should be enough, right? But then I'm like, but I also want you to like me, you know? So I guess that's, I don't know what that is. You know, that's.
I heard an old writer was say one time, saints don't get offended. And I think that all of us are on approval is something to all of us, right? Some of us, we deal with it more intensely than others. My dad actually used to say this all the time. There's 3 basic idolatries of the brokenness, the broken part of the ego: comfort, power, and approval. So we all tend to have one dominant place. Like I really want to be comfortable and I don't want to be inconvenienced. And those folks, certainty becomes actually really important. Approval, what other people think is really important and has everything to do with how I live. And so our codependency is up. And codependency is basically, if you're not okay, I'm not okay. So I'm constantly, a psychological term is borrowed functioning. I'm constantly going, I need to know how you're doing because that'll help me orient myself in the world. So I can borrow functioning from you. I don't have to be fully responsible. See, because if I'm fully responsible, then it doesn't really matter what you think.
Yes.
And most of us don't, like full responsibility is freedom. And most of us are not that interested in freedom. I was reading a piece by a Nazi soldier after the war. They were interviewing him. Why do you want to follow Hitler, the Nazi party? He said, because it was just easier to give him my freedom.
Yes.
Tell me what to do.
I just saw, and I think there was 3 things you were mentioning, and you listed off 2. So let's come back to that. But I think there was 2 guys traveling around the country in 2018 and 19. I can't remember their names now, giving talks at universities, and they said, people think the most basic need of human beings is a desire for freedom. It's not. It's a desire to be taken care of. That's what that guy who was in Nazi Germany just let himself go to that deep.
Take care of me.
Take care of
Maslow's
me.
hierarchy of needs: food, shelter, clothing. You know, if you'll take care of that, and that is true for all of it. There's a basic primal piece, right? We've got to start here before we can even get to any kind of emotional safety. But once you know you got food on the table and you got enough clothes on your back and you got a shelter, then the next is emotional safety. And a lot of us spend our lives in that space, and we rarely tend to go on. I just want to feel emotionally safe, whatever it takes. So the third one is power. So if I can control you, I can feel safe.
Okay.
So this shows up in a lot of our parenting. I'm not actually that interested in discovering who you are as a small human being becoming on the planet. You entered my life. I need some behavioral modification so that my world is full of comfort, controlled, and I might even live vicariously through you. So I need you to like me. And now we say to our children, I need you to be responsible for my emotional needs.
Ooh, man, that's crushing.
Yeah, it sucks.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a parent of 4. Those moments are really horrible moments. You know, like when I look back and I go, oh, I was counting on you to deliver and take care of my emotional needs. And that's where enmeshment comes in. I deal with that with coaching a lot. It's folks who are just like, I've been counting. I have a bad relationship with my spouse, so I'm counting on X kid to fill my emotional needs. And
yes,
that shows up in narcissism later on as an adult.
Yes. you know how sometimes you hear an idea or an exhortation or truth, and you tend to sometimes you're like, that's not something I deal with. There's probably other people that are hearing that, and then there's some things where you just said about parenting. It's like, ooh, that's I need to do I need to do an inward search on that and maybe course correct a little bit, because that crops up in my parenting too much for sure.
It's easy for all
of
us.
It is. Yeah. And so parenting, what would be some, parenting's a big topic. I have 5 kids between 10 and 2 years old. There's a lot of parents that are listening to this podcast. And I feel like no one really feels like they're an expert at parenting.
Yeah.
And so anytime you get some parenting
it's the hardest job in the world, right?
Yeah, it really is. They're open to it. So I know you've spent some time recently teaching on parenting. Mm-hmm. What are some of your thoughts there? What are some of your current thoughts on parenting?
Well, again, I start with there's so little I know. So I got to start with, I got to walk up to this thing with great humility, because my failures stick out pretty quickly, and it's you don't ever stop. You kind of transition from parenting to consulting when you have an adult child, but there's an element of being a parent that never quite goes away.
What age would you say go from parenting to consulting?
It's interesting. So I have a whole piece. I actually have a book I started and I never finished it, but it's called Right Then Left, and the subtitle is something about rite of passage. I don't think in the West we do a really good job of helping our children know when they're transitioning from childhood to adulthood. Like the Jewish culture does this really well. Mm-hmm. Native American culture does this really well. We just tend to, maybe by default, it's when you go off to college, but like we're just not real good at that kind of thing. Like here's the mark. So for each of so I have twin 24-year-old boys.
Oh, I didn't know you had twins.
Yeah, off the top, that was interesting.
Wow.
21-year-old girl and a 14-year-old girl.
Okay.
So for the 3 oldest, who have all hit 16, gone through the age of 16, we've done a rite of passage.
Okay.
And it was a place, and I could summarize it by saying, hey, your mom and I, whatever you can do for yourself, we will no longer do for you. This is the mark of transition. So with the boys, I took them on an Appalachian Trail for like a 55-mile hike in 4 days. I thought this is going to be really good because it's going to be really hard on them, and it was the middle of July, and it was super hot. What I didn't factor in was that I was going to be with them.
You were thinking like the boys are going on this hike.
Yeah.
This would be great for the boys. This is going
to be so hard for them. Yeah. And then I'm like, wait, they're 16, and I was in my mid-40s. I'm dying the whole time. Yeah. Like, this was the dumbest idea. But there were these, we could tell that story. There's a powerful story. There are a lot of cool things that happened on that trip, but and there's this speaking into in this like sense of like, hey, you're becoming a man. This is a mark in time, and we marked it with down here in the South, getting your driver's license.
Okay,
you're now going to have a weaponized vehicle. Like if you don't take care of this, you can hurt someone. So we want you to see you have to be responsible as an adult. That started the kind of letting go. 18 was certainly another major transition point of this kind of you're becoming responsible for your way in the world. So those would be 2 marks. 16 and 18 for us were 2 primary. Mm-hmm. But there's from the day they come out of the womb, you start the process of letting go, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm just stewarding another human being on the planet. And my job is to be a guide. And I just did a parenting challenge last week, actually, with a good friend of mine named Anna Skates, and all of her studies been around what she calls respectful parenting. And it's creating a mutual respect and remember that that child is also a human being. Mm-hmm. And so we sometimes are like, you're dependent on me. I need you to, like, my home is full of chaos. I need you to function correctly so I don't lose my mind.
Yes.
And sometimes that's the practical, right? Like that's just the day. But when we can slow it down and be intentional and start to go, wait a second, this is about development. So when you're throwing a temper tantrum outside the car and you won't get in your seat and you're losing your mind, while we're at a restaurant or whatever, rather than like, get your butt in the car, I'm going to, whatever. It's like, this is interesting. And this is a word I use. This word's become so important to me. It's always been important, but I think it has catalyzed around this word. The word is curiosity. Is the more I stay curious, number one, the less judgmental I am for people. and systems and political parties and all this stuff, the more curious I am. But when I'm curious, it also allows me to pull on that empathetic place to go,
Yeah.
You're throwing a temper tantrum about what? And if you can slow it down instead of just getting the behavior fixed, you go, hey, buddy, well, clearly you're upset. Can you tell me, can you find any words around that? Like, what's that about? You know, developmentally, especially if they're young. Like, I don't want to leave. So this is about grief. You loved being in that place with that family or jumping on the trampoline or whatever. Like, this is actually you learning about separation and the grief of loss. So you're dealing with loss. Yeah. You don't have a lot of words, but you know how to cry and stomp your feet. But this is an opportunity to talk about loss. It's really hard when you love something to walk away from it, isn't it? Man, I hear that. And now suddenly you're on your knee, leaning against the back tire, talking to your kid. You slow the whole thing down. You get curious. And you have a wonderful conversation, and it can be empathetic. Like, you know, I remember a time when I had a lot of loss, and it was really hard for me to let go or leave. But here's the good news. We're actually going to come back here. Or maybe we're not coming back to this place, but there's going to be another opportunity for fun like this. Would that be neat? Would you like to look forward to that? That's called hope. That's called anticipation. And you're giving them words, and you're having a moment, and the next thing you know, often the thing is kind of somewhat been resolved, and it's like, I see you, as opposed to, why are you freaking out? Get your butt in the car.
Yes. Well, now you're on the same side as the kid. Now you're on the same side with the kid on the issue, basically. Like, it's you and the kid together, kind of looking at the issue together, and you guys are on the same side addressing it, as opposed to the parent and kid being on kind of opposite sides.
And watch how this shows up in almost every area of our life. You're doing a behavior that I don't really like. I have a degree of power. I'm going to power over you. You do what I tell you. Fix your behavior so I don't feel uncomfortable. Take that to every single relationship you have.
Yeah.
And if you slow it down, choose not to have a power over moral superiority, and you go, hey, tell me about that. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So you love doing drugs? Tell me about it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I got ADD or ADHD, and actually when I smoke pot, I can't tell you how much it helps me show up in the world. So when you smoke pot, you actually feel more connected to yourself. Yeah. I don't even know if it's good for me, but my mind is going so fast, so hard all the time. I'm emotionally and mentally exhausted. Wow, okay. Well, in today's world, would CBD oil be an alternative, and maybe some of the other things that come with smoking? Maybe you could avoid some of the negative aspects of that. Would that be a possibility? I don't know. I never tried CBD. Well, you know, there's a shop up the street. You want to? I'll go. I'll buy you some. Let's make an experience.
Yep.
Everything changes.
Yep. And now you understand them better. They may actually seriously consider some ideas that they hadn't considered before. They may not take them,
right?
But they may consider them. Yeah. And if you just come back to, no, you can't smoke weed, it's not legal here in the state or whatnot, then you're just reinforcing what everyone else is saying to them, and off you go. But the idea that curiosity breeds empathy is a new thought. And it's very interesting because it's right. When someone is curious about you sense a certain empathy that they have. I mean, what you just said about pot and CBD, it was curiosity and then it was empathy. That's an interesting concept that I had not thought of before.
And don't we all want to be seen?
Yeah.
In that moment.
Kids too. Yeah, kids want to be seen.
Every one of us.
They want to be seen at a young age. Just last week on the way home from jiu-jitsu, our 10-year-old son wanted to listen to the song, and he kept repeating it. And great song. I can't think of the name now, but basically it was like the singer is saying, you know, I mess up a lot, but don't give up on me. I'm still a good person. I'm misunderstood, but I'm going to be there for the world one day. And he wanted to like listen to it a few times, and I'm thinking to myself, that's what he's thinking.
Yep.
It's exactly what he's thinking, because you know what I was thinking when I was 10 years old? I was thinking some of the same thing.
And you
I
know
wasn't
what? The
understood.
singer saw him.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
You know me.
And here's the honest truth of that, as much as I hate to admit it, that he felt more understood, I'll bet you, from that singer than he did by me at certain points, maybe right then, or at certain points in his life. Too often, I would say. So yeah, I love those thoughts. How about girls and boys? If 3 boys and 2 girls, are there some things that do these what you're talking about here? Do these concepts work equally well with boys and girls, or there's some difference you've noticed raising boys versus girls?
I think the concept works the same. The biggest difference is that process is very important to girls. So this is a stereotype because it's not true for all. Some boys tend to be just more emotional, and some girls tend to be less emotional. But the more emotional the person, the more process tends to be important, especially if they are a verbal processor or an extrovert, because they're having several needs met at one time. Verbal processors need to hear the words come out of their mouth, so it's auditory. They need to say it, but they're not just saying it; they're hearing themselves saying it, and it's helping them. It's like putting it out in the world and then like taking a diamond and spinning and look at all the facets. Then you have your internal processors. They don't actually want to say it. They also tend to not feel emotionally safe saying it. They want to spin it around in their minds, not out loud, because they're thinking internally. Those tend to be more introverted people. And then once they've thought it through a few times, they're safe enough to articulate it. This is a sweeping stereotype, but if there were some general differences, and it's true in my home, that with the guys, let's say there was a conflict or something, to be like, hey, you didn't do this. We need to do this. Tell me about this. How about that? Okay. The girls, you didn't do this. You didn't. Tell me about that. Tell me about that. We might be here for a while.
Yeah.
So I just buckle up because this may be a long, because they got to kind of find their way through it. The story's important. We're gonna go on these rabbit trails to here and details to there, and that's part of the learning. And so it takes a degree of patience. If you're not wired that way, then you have to be very patient. And especially if your agenda for the conversation was concise, which is true for if you've had a busy day, if you're wired as a man who this is rational, logical, let's get to the point. You've got to change your expectations. Expectations, as a great line I've heard, are often premeditated resentments.
Expectations are often premeditated resentments. Dang.
Stay with that for just a second. Because what happened was it's like writing in pen. I'm going to have a conversation with you. This is going to take 10 minutes or it's going to be done. I'm going to move on. Well, this conversation's not taking 10 minutes. Now, I hit the 10-minute mark, I'm resentful. I'm agitated. I'm frustrated. I wanted this to be over. I wanted to go change my clothes. I wanted to go eat. I wanted to watch the game. I wanted to be done. I'm just tired. And this thing is now, this happens with your spouse all the time. Now, wait a second. This was a 30-minute conversation, an hour conversation. You've just screwed up my night. Underneath, I've got this energy that's actually full of resentment. And it's starting to bubble up in anger and frustration. Now there's no seeing anything. Now I'm just trying to get my agenda done. Expectancy is a little bit more fluid. That's a little bit more like writing in pencil. Like, well, I kind of hope this conversation takes about 15 minutes. But if it doesn't, I might be a little disappointed, but I'm not thrown off.
Yes.
So there's a difference between expectations and expectancy for me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some of that's semantics, but it's helpful when you can language something.
Yes.
So I just would say in parenting, if you have a highly emotional child, boy or girl, just know process is probably important, and let them kind of wander through it a little bit. And it's important to listen.
For someone who realizes or is thinking to themselves, man, I parent too much on the side of certainty and giving commands and not listening enough. I'm asking for a friend. What do you suggest, or some ways they can start? I mean, do you just start at the next altercation, basically, and just start there? Like tonight, if something pops up, instead of just giving a command and expecting obedience, just talk through it more? Or how do you kind of start to ingrain this much better, more holistic, much more growth-oriented, preparing them for life way of parenting that you're describing?
Yeah. That's a great question. There are two ways. I think, first of all, you can deal with it. I think it's always better to be intentional ahead of time. I have some thoughts on that. But if there was an altercation tonight, a great phrase for you, just as kind of a hook, is, hey, tell me about that.
Mm.
Just so there's no judgment. And your tone, not what are you doing? Not that, but like, hey, what's that? Tell me about that. It sounds like I hear a frustrated tone. Tell me a little bit about that. Well, oh my gosh, today I can't believe it. And you asked so much of me. You think I can do this and this and this, and does that feel like a lot? Yeah, it feels like a lot. So would you say you feel overwhelmed? That's what I'm saying. Of course I feel overwhelmed. Okay, well, what would it be like to not feel overwhelmed? Oh, heaven, are you kidding me? I'd have to leave this home. Okay, well, is there, maybe this is something we can negotiate on. My hope for you is not that you live life overwhelmed. And it is really hard being a teenager. And whenever it comes to being overwhelmed, we always have to take it down into parts. So it feels overwhelming usually because there's so much on our minds. So let's sit together and let's make a list. Let me see if I can help. Tell me what you're overwhelmed with. I got homework, I got dance, I got this, I got that. What else? What else? Well, okay, so it's about 6 things. Yeah, it seems like there's so many more than that.
Right.
Okay, but these 6 things, yeah, okay. Is there anything it looks like I could help with? I don't have time to do my chores. Okay, let's negotiate. Would it be, you want to move that to Saturday morning? This week, would it help if I did your chores for you? Yeah. Okay, I'll tell you what, I'll do them for you this week. Okay. See, now everything shifts.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, your kid, honestly, most kids are going to be like, that's so weird. Dad's doing my, she'll go talk to your mother, her mother, and be like, Dad's doing my chores. Is something wrong with him? No, I just think your dad loves you. And, usually he's pissed. Well, there's a lot going on in our home. And honestly, for him to do this is a pretty big sacrifice. Oh, yeah, okay. Everything shifts in your home.
Yes. Yep. Well, the one thing that stood out to me too is you're asking questions, not making statements. And it's like, man, we know that with other things. I mean, working relationships, those types of things.
Well
you
said.
get your own way a lot better if you can lead people in, not in a manipulative sort of sense, but it's a lot better to let people arrive at their own conclusions through you helping them.
Well said.
Using questions,
if you can
look
at your kids like you're actually you're a human being, like my friend or my colleague. What if I treated you like would I treat my colleague how I'm treating you right now?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question to ask. It's a great way to get curious.
Yes. Do your kids, have you been successful at, so you said 24, 21.
24, 24, 21,
Yep.
and 14.
Yep. Do they like being around you, even though now they're old enough that they wouldn't need to be? Have you been successful at that?
What's cool is I remember when I was young thinking, I actually said this to teens, I'm like, oh, well, she's 14. She's still giving me a hug before she goes to bed. That's good. I don't know when does that end, And you know what? They all still give us a hug. My 14-year-old still every night says, I love you, Dad. Good night. So I feel really blessed. Yes. As a matter of fact, my sons and I, this has been a dream for a while, and it was always about timing. But yesterday, my sons and I recorded our first podcast.
Oh, cool.
So it's called Father, Sons, and Holy Questions.
Oh, very cool. And coming out soon.
Yeah, coming out soon.
Fathers, Sons, and Holy Questions?
Father, Sons, and Holy Questions.
Father, singular.
Yeah.
Sons, and Holy Questions.
Yeah.
Love it.
Because me and the twins.
Right.
And it's a conversation on nuance. The first episode is called A Return to Nuance.
Okay.
So it's a conversation. If love is context specific, why have we generalized, stereotyped, and dehumanized everybody?
Yeah.
So if we can get back to everyone is subtlety and nuance. So I don't know if you've heard this. I'm quoting a cinematographer. I can't remember, Albert somebody. But he said, tyranny is the deliberate removal of nuance. And when we speak like everybody's this, Democrats are this, Republicans are this, politicians are this, religious people are this. When we remove the nuance, we get the superior moral high ground.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as you put nuance in, you have to go back to empathy. Because now I got to see, wait. What happened to you when you were 8? Wait, how were you affected? How did this show up in your life later on? Being a middle child and unseen, how does that affect your pain?
Mm-hmm.
Enneagram type, how do you show up in the world with this personality type? Suddenly the nuance forces us to slow everything down see people, and if we'll get curious, we'll wind up with empathy.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, I think if your 24-year-old son's recording a podcast with you, mostly answer my question, because that is something my wife and I think about a lot. Not that we want them to just come and want to be with us as to sort of check some, or to be codependent, I guess, on them. But the truth is, when they grow older and make their own decisions, we want them to come by, Bring your spouses, bring your girlfriends and boyfriends, and let's hang out, That's a big statement about when nuance goes away. Boy, say that again about tyranny and nuance.
Tyranny is the deliberate removal of nuance.
So I don't know if you noticed, but a lot of nuance is gone.
Oh, we're in the middle of that, right?
It's been the middle of that.
Yeah, it's flatlined.
So what does that mean? What does that mean for this country? What does that mean for our society? Because nuance is basically gone.
First of all, it's not. The one thing I will say, so I grew up as a history guy. I love history, so armchair historian. But the one thing I'll say is when we start to go, oh my gosh, this is the most important election of all time. Nothing has ever been like this in our country, et cetera, et cetera. I just say to everybody, please go back to every election cycle since the history of our country, especially the first two. I mean, really all of them. But go back to Washington when he was first elected president, and then when he was elected for the second term. His whole cabinet disbands. Jefferson, Madison, the people who started with him are now against him. And you know what the argument is? It's small government versus big government. That's the argument from a day one in the United States of America.
Wow.
It has not changed.
Yeah.
Read the press over Washington and Jefferson and they are ripping each other to shreds. It's horrific. We live in Tennessee, Hermitage, you got Andrew Jackson. I mean, just go read stuff around the politics around. Nothing's changed.
Yeah.
It's a really faulty system. We think the Great American Experiment's the best one we got, but it's just, we're talking about from a spiritual perspective. And I'm a follower of Jesus, and I believe his teaching about a third way, which he calls the kingdom. I understand that to be an alternate reality, a different way of being. But this is the best we got right now. These systems, but they're totally a mess, and they live in tension with one another. And somehow the American experiment has worked so far, but it kind of works in the tension of it all.
Yeah, you're right about that. Yeah. Okay, so you acknowledge that there's a lot of issues going on, but you're also saying, look, we've been through tough times before. There's been tough times basically every election cycle. We're going to get through this, and you have some amount of optimism going forward. I'm totally an optimist. And the reason for it is because when you have this level, right now it's just all highlighted, right? It's highlighted because it's people are it's top of mind. In an election cycle, everything's pushed to top of mind because you're told the sky is falling. Your opposing party is saying, in our American system, for those listening outside of the country, in our American system, there's two dominant parties. So one party is saying, if the other guy gets in or lady gets in, your whole world as you know it is going to cease to exist. That there's a lot of fear-mongering that terrifies us, so it's all top of mind. And then everybody's talking about their water cooler conversations, but after the election, just think about it like December 4th. It just doesn't have the same energy. No, it really doesn't. Yeah.
So now I will say there's always something to learn in it. Life comes to us as our teacher. The great thing to learn is, do you see the hatred that comes up when we deliberately remove nuance? What replaces it is hatred. I've dehumanized you, and I've turned you into a stereotype. And everybody like you. Because now I don't have to care for you as a human being. I don't have to care for your soul. I don't have to see you. I don't have to live in the tension that you are a reflection of me, which is Jungian psychology. It's all shadow work. So the thing you hate the most in somebody else is another thing I do with my clients. What's the thing that irritates you the absolute most in another human being? That's the thing that you're projecting from yourself, probably. It's the thing you hate most in yourself. And it might not be conscious, it could be subconscious. But you're like, oh my gosh, that guy, he's all about being right all the time. It's all dogma. So get curious And is there any energy in you that's actually jealous at that person's willingness to so speak out what they believe?
Mm.
Do you actually secretly admire it? And are you envious of it? Go find out if you're projecting something you've actually suppressed deep down. There's so much envy and jealousy buried inside us, and it often comes up in our irritations with other people.
Yeah, that's very good insight. I think that's remarkably well said. I won't try to add to it, but I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier on, which is this idea that sometimes you would even say, maybe in preaching or teaching or whatever, that I'm not entirely sure, and then you continue.
Almost every week, yes.
Yeah, okay. So there's that level of genuineness, I think, just being real with people, I think really kind of works with my generation, works with me anyway. And I think I can speak for other people my general age, because I think we're sort of kind of tired of the know everything, here's how it all is, and, my way, the highway. However, but then where is the bounds of, you can also become like too loosey-goosey, I assume, at some point, right? Some things we do know. So how do you balance that with not sure, but there's some things we just know?
Certainty is one of the basic needs, right? So there are about 5 basic human needs, and certainty is one of them. So we have to have something that we hold to. And so because we have to have a grounding place. What do I know? Well, I believe in this thing called gravity. If I hold a penny and drop it, it's going to hit the ground. It's just something I know. Is there an exception to that rule? Yep. If they put me in a special kind of simulator, if they take me off to the moon, gravity won't be what I know it to be right now. But it's what I know it to be. So I'm somewhat disassociative to gravity. I'm not thinking about gravity each day. I'm just trusting that it exists. I'm going to get in my car. I'm going to trust that my car works. I'm going to trust that someone else is not going to drive into me head on, and that the people who designed the highway system, that it's basically going to function. I'm disassociative to the fact that it actually doesn't function every day in horrific ways. But I have my kind of own illusion of certainty in it. So I do think you when you start to unpack it from a philosophical standpoint, you can kind of pull certainty off the ledge all the time. So the whole, we got to know something. Yeah, I'm telling myself I know that, but again, this is very philosophical, but ultimately, like I could say I know that Jesus is the Son of God. Why do I know that? Well, a lot of people who I respect told me that. I read it in a book that I admire, and I've experienced the transcendent. And my way of languaging that is that Jesus is the Son of God. Is it possible that he's not? Not from my perspective, but the possibility exists. So I've placed my trust in this, that it's true. Other people have placed their trust in other things that it's true. But we can, the whole knowing thing can get unraveled pretty quickly when you realize that, especially when you get to the divine, that aspect, because we think of God. And all it takes is a couple of looks down the Hubble telescope, and you go, "Oh wow, there's so much I don't know." I put God inside. We anthropomorphize God so that we can connect, and I think that's a gift to us. I picture God with hands, or I picture God smiling, or laughing, or loving me. And Jesus, of course, has been very helpful for that, to picture a loving person. But is that who he is? Of course not. He's not contained in a person. He's beyond, and Christ is holding all things together. He's animating all of life, right? So that's just the spiritual aspect. But then take this is what I know is true about science. Quantum theory. I know that's true. You do? Well, how do you know it? Well, because these really smart guys gave me some language around what do I experience. Okay. So to me, this is why the Center of Jesus teaching is always about faith. There's kind of actually, you're showing up every day actually risking to be alive. Mm-hmm. And the more you will, and I do think that we're back to the divine again, the more you place your trust in the divine, the less you have to have certainty in all these other things, which typically at some point in time will fail you.
Yeah, that's key. Yep.
We could go a lot of different places with that. But when it comes to kind of the basic needs is, we all have to place our trust in something or someone. Mm-hmm. The question is where you choose to place it. My journey and 50 years on the planet has been, I trust in God, And my experience with humanity, so this is subjective, but everything from 12-step people who've gone, who are the people to me who have faced the bottom. I mean, those who have really faced addictions that are going to kill them. They've faced life at the extremes, to kind of someone who maybe hasn't been through a lot of crisis, but has lived maybe a life in kind of they've had a pretty good marriage, and they have a few kids, and they lived in a suburban world, and kind of what we might call a fairly safe, predictable life, and they have this deep love for God. Like kind of the whole, if you look at the whole gamut, the consistent piece I see in humanity is without a connection to the spiritual and the divine, ultimately you're left very disassociative and lonely. And to me, loneliness is one of the greatest pains on the planet. So if I meet someone who's like, there is no such thing as spiritual, there's no such thing as God, like, I don't have to prove anything to you, but gosh, that must be really lonely.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting kind of reaction to that. Yep, and you're totally right. The certainty thing is, I have a lion and a gazelle up there on the bookshelf.
Oh yeah,
here.
Yeah,
And it's not just because I like lions or gazelles. It's because I read in a book, there's a guy named Santayana who I don't know much about, but he said one time that a lion must surely be more secure that God is on his side than a gazelle. And I've thought about that a fair bit. Like, what's he saying? Because I think he's right. A lion must surely be more secure that God is on his side than a gazelle. And I think it's certainty. A gazelle has more uncertainty than a lion. A lion has a little bit more certainty than a gazelle. There's less things that are going to kill a lion. There's a lot more things that are going to kill a gazelle, including the lion. But here's the thing. The lion does not necessarily have more nobility than a gazelle. Like, they're both animals, both created by God.
Yeah.
You know, they're both majestic and wonderful and beautiful in their own right, but they're different.
Yeah.
But one has more uncertainty. So the lion should probably check himself. He probably has a little less certainty, than he thinks he does. And the gazelle is just going to have a strategy, and deal with that one kind of weakness that it has, which is not to get eaten by the lion, but there's still a lot of good, that it can do. So, but too much uncertainty though, you can just sort of your life can just unravel, right? But too much can really let you down. If you have, like, you feel like you really have kind of everything or a lot of things really certain, that's a ticking time bomb, right? I mean, that's not going to last. Yeah. At some point, you're going to realize, that didn't work. So, but then no certainty, you're just kind of amorphous or just kind of a puddle, right? So somewhere in the middle there is enough of certainty. I'm just thinking of even simple things like habits and practices and even some beliefs and those types of things where you can kind of put in place some consistency, but then still enough uncertainty to have an open mind and to learn new things and to go on new adventures and to those types of things, right? Sure. I mean, is that how you'd kind of think through that?
Life is truly, it becomes the adventure that way, right? Instead of it being, life is about me building a really safe, boring existence that's certain and totally protected, which is, as you pointed out, which is true for all of us. I mean, if anything, a global pandemic should tell us, which is just an illusion, right? For people who have been through horrible financial crises, who thought, gosh, my money was safe there, and it wasn't.
Yes.
Or a health thing, I'm healthy, I'm safe, and they weren't. That's dismantled pretty quickly.
Yes.
So when it comes to I do have to have some level of certainty to show up on the planet. What do I know is true? Which I think is a really great question. What do you know is true? Truth sometimes has baggage for people if they grew up in certain religious circles, because truth is often beat over them as an abstract thing. Interestingly enough, back to Jesus' teaching, he says, I am truth. I am what's true. So there's something about the divine, if we're looking for what's true. So let's say God is true, and I get to tune into kind of that energy. What is true? Well, I think this is really hard to argue if you look back at all of history. In anyone's subjective experience, great meaning comes from relationship. Very few human beings lived and died on the planet in isolation and said, this was the greatest form of existence we know. There's a reason we actually use it as a form of torture, isolation. So what's true? Relating, connection, relationship. This is true. Okay, well, then if the deepest truism is a connection with the divine, then that's a pretty good place to start.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So what can I be certain in? What do I understand to be true about God? This is where there was a divergent movement for me in some religious circles. What I understand to be true about God is that I'm already loved. Some folks I know in religious circles go, you're actually not loved until you pray a prayer. You're actually not loved unless you were a selected group of people before the hands of time that God picked to be in his love. There's divergence for me when I go, I actually think everyone's already loved. I think that's actually the story. And this is what's true for me about God. That becomes my starting place. Mm-hmm. So my security is in a deep, loving connection with God. So that's the closest thing I have towards certainty.
Yeah.
And now from there, what does it look like to live a flourishing life full of relationships? Because that's the other thing. I work with a lot of wealthy clients and people in the music industry and entertainment industry. You know, I've talked about that. And it doesn't matter how much success, fame, or money you have. They all got problems.
Yeah.
It's just a trade-off of problems.
Yeah.
So if you're like, I might just had more money. I heard Bill Murray say this. He was like, hey, yeah, those of you who want to be rich and famous, hey, just try the rich part and see if that doesn't cover it for you.
Yes. Particularly in today's day and age, don't you think?
Yeah, totally.
Rich and famous worked a little better than 90s.
Right, totally. So, it's so, but even if you have, well, it's just always a trade-off of problems. So you're showing up in the world. And where you're going to place your security, to me, if you find what your starting place is. But I'll tell you, across the socioeconomic spectrum, what matters for people is, it's cliche, but that deathbed thing, it's a great exercise. I still use it. Like, you're laying there on your deathbed, you got a few more breaths, take one last look around your bed. Who's standing there? Well, the people who are standing there are the people that you invested in. They're the people you did life with, people you fought it out with. Who's standing there? Because if you don't show up in the world like this, your current wife's not going to be there. Mm-hmm. You don't show up in the world like this, your children aren't going to be there. You don't show up in the world like this, those friends are not going to be there. You don't show up in the world like this, no one may be there. So how are you showing up in the world as a person, interacting, connecting, and being in relationship with other people? It doesn't matter where you are in the socioeconomic spectrum. If you really get honest with yourself, it's what people value the most.
Yes. So you have worked with a lot of successful artists. I don't know if you could, name a few or whatever you're comfortable with, but I have two questions on that. One is, I'm curious what are some of the common denominators among the successful artists that, and then I'm also curious what goes on in an artist's brain that a more non-artist person like myself, I'm fascinated, but I just don't have that. I don't have that part of the brain that a lot of those people have. It's less active with me for sure.
Yeah.
But what are some of the common denominators among the successful artists?
Well, let's start with creative people, because some of the most creative people are actually behind the artists and you don't get to see them. So producers and, let's stay with producers because I got a number of friends who are producers and songwriters and they're not the guys on the stage. You might not even know their names, but that's where a lot of the magic happens. And most of them, we're back to this concept of divergence. They're divergent thinkers. They're very open and they're creative. So the law of improv. So I used to do improv comedy when I was in college and stuff like that. So the law of improv is whenever somebody like throws you a line, there's never a no. Somebody's like, oh my gosh, it's a purple couch. And you don't go, no, it's not. Like that's like, you can't do that.
Dead. Yep.
I got nothing to do, right? Yep. That's a purple couch. It is. It looks a lot more like an elephant to me. Like the law of improv is you catch it and you toss it back.
Yes.
This is, by the way, the law of improv is pretty good in relationships. I sometimes use this as an analogy in relationships. Hey, when you're talking, you're spitballing with your wife. She may not know you're spitballing. Yep. You're like, hey, I was thinking the other day. And she might go, thinking the other day means you came to a conclusion. You're going to tell me this is what we have to do as a family. And now I'm defensive.
Right.
As opposed to, hey, I got this idea. I'd love to bring you in on it. Let's brainstorm together. Mm-hmm. That's a different conversation.
Yep.
Because now you've invited improv. Hey, what about this? Well, I don't know. What about this? As opposed, I was thinking the other day, we should spend our money on da-da-da.
Yes.
What?
Yeah.
How are we going to spend our money on that? Where are we going to get it from? This is not improvisation. Okay. So I think when creative people tend to be really good at improv, like, hey, what do you think about this? I don't know. What about that? And then they draw from these it's cross training. They draw from these other references. So some might be athletes, and so they're pulling in like athletic metaphor. They had a military background, they're pulling in a military metaphor. They're a literature background, they're pulling in these ancient stories or referencing Shakespeare. Or they might be a movie nut, and there's a Star Wars thing. But they're constantly pulling in these there's this divergence of thought. Now, what tends to be hard for them, again, to catalyze around an identity is most creatives are not rainmakers. They don't know how to make money. So you got to have the other person like, yes, here's the deadline. It has to be done, and we're going to commodify it this way. Because your typical creative is like, it's actually never done. Mm-hmm. There's always another, if it's a live show, it can be like this. If I'm making it tracking, it could always be like this. I recently read the life work of Leonardo da Vinci. Like, he's the quintessential example of that, right? Also someone who was insatiably curious. But he couldn't, to finish something, half of his great works were never finished because he couldn't finish them. He procrastinated. That's very, very creative. There's no linearity with creatives. It's not linear. So which means it's going to feel like there's a lot of wasted time. So if you have a creative child, you're like, oh my gosh, he's been staring at the wall for 20 minutes. Or, again, I'll quote Leonardo. He went to somebody, one of his patrons, like, how come this isn't done yet? You ran in here, you did 3 brush strokes, and then you stood there for an hour and you walked out. Mm-hmm. This is not efficient. Creativity is not efficient. And Leonardo looks at him and he says, you have no idea how much work is being done while I'm standing there silent. It's not efficient. Mm-hmm. So the one thing I would just say
beautiful.
If you have a creative in your life,
yeah,
they're not going to be really efficient. And that's where the art comes from, right?
Yeah.
And it's why they do, by the way, most creatives desperately need then somebody alongside them. I'll tell you, this isn't a parenting failure on my part, and Tyler fits it. Tyler's unusual. My second son by a minute fits this unusual because he's kind of creative and he also is highly organized, but he has ADHD. One of the things we did poorly as parents was he wasn't really diagnosed till after high school. So he was high functioning, did really well in his grades and stuff like that. But I mean, he would get up literally, this is not exaggerating, 5 minutes before the bus would get there, and somehow he'd make it. And his brother had to carry, some of what we had to work through is his brother sometimes carried him. It's because he had a twin brother. And Jordan's an empath, so too much.
Yep.
So there's a story there. But one of the things we did is we often just expected him to fit our normal. And it was not helpful to him. So we've had to come back and go, we actually, hey, if we said this to Tyler, would you pick up that coffee pot, bring it over here, pour me a glass of water, and put it back? He might make it around the table to the coffee pot. After that, it's a crapshoot.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm. Even as an adult. We're in high school.
Even now, yes. And even now, there's so many things happening in his mind at one time. And if he went over to the coffee shop, he goes over to get your coffee pot and he sees there's like some little like herbal thing there. Yeah. He's like, what is that? Can I smell that? I mean, gone, yep, right? Yep. His mind, part of it is the insatiable curiosity. Like, what is that? Mm-hmm. And we would be like, oh my gosh, he just asked you for a stinking glass of water. Bring it over here. And he's full of wonder. It's actually quite childlike and beautiful. And I actually, in my core, deepest place, I want to be like him. Mm-hmm. But my efficiency and I want to make sure I'm doing the job Kent wants from me. Andrew's over there, and I'm kind of thirsty. And all that would suddenly trump the thing that I actually hold valuable more than any other thing is that A, I would like to be like my son and have that kind of curiosity and wonder. Mm-hmm. And B, this is my child being really present. And I shut him down.
Okay, yes.
Because my efficiency or approval for the people in the room was more important.
Yes. And
that happens to creatives all the time.
Hmm.
We're frustrated with them because they don't do it right.
Yeah. Yeah, we want the output from the creatives. We don't want to get caught up in the messiness of the production, of the creation of that. Because let's just face it, I mean, without creatives, we're screwed. I mean, like there
are prophets, there are poets.
Yeah.
They help us see the deeper things of life.
Yes, absolutely. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm curious. Have you tried Adderall with your son who has ADHD?
So we heard so many negative things on Adderall that we started with Vyvanse.
Okay.
And it was really, really helpful.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. The beauty with Vyvanse is you can take it or not take it. So you
okay.
take it you take it in the morning. It's like a 1-day deal, and boom, you're done.
I see.
And so, yeah, he would say, I mean, it was all the stuff floating around like,
wow.
And a funny story is when Tyler was being diagnosed, I'm like, he was really having trouble. So I took him into the doctor's office. He's being diagnosed. And there was a sheet, the doctor walked out and Tyler was doing something. And there was a sheet on the table that had like a test for ADD, which I was like, So the doctor walked in. I was like, hey, I just kind of took this while I was sitting here. He's like, oh, congratulations. You're like 3 for 4. Yeah, you're a home run ADD candidate. I'm like, great. Everybody's always told me that. And now it's official.
Yeah.
I went through a hard season in 2016. We had a lot of loss, a big transition in our church, a lot of expectations and stuff. And I tried Vyvanse too. And man, it was magical. I didn't do it very long, but it was. Oh, really? But the ability, what it lets you do in terms of focus was awesome.
Is it prescription?
Yeah.
Okay. So I just watched 2 nights ago, I think it was, or 3, watched a documentary on Netflix called, I can't remember what, but it was all about Adderall use in college. For college kids.
Vyvanse, same thing.
Okay. Well, man.
They use it to cram for tests. And
by the time I was done with that documentary, the documentary, it's both like speaking positively about Adderall and some of those, Ritalin, some of those drugs that have a helpful effect. And then it also talks about the side benefits. So it's not like the documentary is like kind of picking a side, if you will. But, man, there were some benefits in there on taking Ritalin that I was like, man, maybe I should try to get some Ritalin somewhere.
How about that? It was a black market guy.
Yeah, I could probably be diagnosed for ADHD, to be honest with you. But then the one thing that, because I'm always looking to, how do you optimize your brain? You know what I mean? Like, I'm always curious about that. Anything I can do. I know fats help, avocados, cod liver oil, those things do help with brain performance. And it looked to me like Ritalin was helping people get crap done. But it did mention in there, Ritalin doesn't actually help you to be smarter. It just helps you to be more awake, more alert, work through the night, like those types of things. So,
but they all have side effects, right? Like any pharmaceutical has a side effect. So it's just a matter of, so I have a friend of mine who's a neuroscientist. He's actually one of the most influential in the city. And he said, I asked him about it, and he said, all that stuff is helpful, but you got to look at it like it's going to get you from here to there.
Okay.
It's when you get on pharmaceuticals long term, there's usually a pretty heavy cost.
Yeah.
So that was his recommendation, was just let it get you from here to there, but don't stay.
Yeah, that makes sense. Were you have toured as kind of the pastor for King and Country at certain points, haven't you?
Yeah.
Those boys are really great.
They're very talented.
I mean, in the world of Christian music, they're phenomenal.
Yeah, they are.
What do you think were some of the contributors to their success?
Theirs is interesting. It's kind of across the board. There are a number of different things that kind of catalyzed for them. If I plucked a couple of things, first of all, who you see on stage is who they are. So there's an integrity, and by my definition of integrity is just they're congruent with who they are, who they say they are, and who they are. So there's a congruent piece to that. So being genuine and authentic in who they are, that's going to go 1,000 miles. Number 2, they genuinely love people. I've never seen a band. I've traveled with some other bands too. It blows my mind how long they will sit afterwards doing a meet and greet before. Because I'm like, man, before when I would teach or if I'm speaking in a convention or something, I'm usually pretty locked in.
Yes.
Focused. Their ability to, I don't know, we're going to go talk to these 8 families before the show.
Before the show?
Yeah, before or after. It kind of blew me away. So their willingness to be with people, to see people, when you, it looks glamorous because you're there for a 2-hour show. The day of is not glamorous. You're you roll in on the bus, everybody's rolling out of your bunks at 8 a.m. You get to you're walking in the back of this arena, you're rolling in sound stages. They might have a shower, hopefully. You're carting out all your soap and stuff. There's food. You got to get there on time for it to be warm and all. It looks super glamorous, but it's a hard, like you see that road life repetitively is a hard life, right? So you got to have a certain wiring. And they do. It's amazing collectively. And they grew up in a family doing this. Their older sister's Rebecca St. James. So the boys were young doing that. Their dad managed Rebecca, and he's a part of their management team now. And that, to me, David is a huge part of their success as well. And David had a huge loss. He got burned early on. And there's a compassion and kindness to David, which is their dad, that I deeply admire. And so
that explains a lot.
Yeah. I
didn't know that.
Yeah. He got burned. And when they first arrived in the country, they literally lost everything. He was very successful in Australia as a promoter, which is another interesting thing because he knows both sides. So now he's with a band as a manager, and a manager connects in town with the promoter, the person who put the money up front, who's bringing the show in. The promoter's it's a big gamble. Will this band actually sell the tickets? Will the show go on? Will nobody get sick? Will there not be some weird pandemic? Like the promoters, there's a lot of risk for the promoter. Well, David I've heard him and watched him on the road talk to promoters and actually bear some of the risk with them. That's unheard of because he was one. Mm-hmm. So empathy.
Yep.
He knows what that life is like. He's been burned. And so David's, I think, a big part of it. But they're hard workers. Joel is one of my dearest friends, and Joel is multi-talented, and his focus is just unreal. I mean, at times I'd be like, afterwards he's, like, let's break down the show. What didn't go right? I'd be like, I think this is crack for you. This might not be healthy. Like, just rest for a minute and celebrate.
Yeah.
But his level of desire for excellence is so off the charts. Anything that has value, it's usually that last 5%, right? You're like, the magic happens in the last 5% of dialing in. It's like working out. You're like, I got that last rep, but all the magic happens in those last couple you can't get up. It's the same thing to me when you're creating something. The magic is, everybody does this thing, but those little details, those little things you add to it. And they spend a lot of time on that last 5%.
Yeah, I think it's evident. My friend Seth Mosley, I think it was with Full Circle Music, has worked with them a fair bit.
Yeah,
and
I know Seth. He's great.
He's great. He has mentioned they're just great performers.
Yeah.
It's just really good performers.
They're entertainers, man.
Yeah, they're entertainers. Yeah, absolutely. Changing subjects a little bit. Now you are into life coaching, essentially.
Yeah.
It's one of the things, anyway, which I'd like to hear more about. But one of the things you texted me was... you're now immersed in the lives of those who lack meaning or purpose. Yeah. And then that was just a part of a sentence. But that really jumped out to me. I've kind of 3 questions on that. Being immersed in the lives of those who lack meaning or purpose. How prevalent is this? How fixable is it? And how do you go about accomplishing that?
Those are great questions. So that was part of when we planted Journey 15 years ago, I did it because I was a youth pastor for 13 years. I loved being with teenagers. And again, I kind of went kicking and screaming out of it. I just saw myself doing that for a lifetime. I suppose probably, it's hard to stay that relevant to a group of, adolescent culture is changing all the time. But when we planted the church and we had this kind of group of misfits, and a lot of people have been religiously wounded, and there was just kind of this space, again, kind of this divergent creative space to go, we don't have if you need certainty and answers, we're probably not the church for you. But if you got lots of questions and you're willing to lean into the mystery and live the mess with us, then hey, let's go. And that was kind of how the church grew. And then we had about 300 people. I remember being like, hey, can we not let anybody else in?
Yeah.
And I grew up in mega churches. I went to college that was kind of had a lot of mega church stuff. And I'm like, because I just see how people start to become numbers, names, almost like cattle, and they cease to be stories. And I didn't know so much. I mean, my pastoring, the whole thing was an experiment. I was just trying to make my way every day. And I know that healthy things grow. So you can't not let a thing grow. Now, I also know healthy things reproduce. So pretty quickly we were like, well, what if we just kept telling people to leave and go plant new churches, which we did. We bought 10 other churches over the course of our 13, 14 years. But I think inherently I just thought I knew I don't really want to run an organization. And once it hits a certain point, that's what's going to happen, which is what happened. We grew, and then we eventually had to leave the factory. A guy bought it and asked us to leave, and which was, we kind of got kicked out of the nest, but it's always an opportunity to grow. But that was a really hard season. And then we had to find property, buy the property, build a building, etc. None of which I was really into. But I love the people. It was hard to say no, hard to leave. Probably some of my codependency. No, let's take the filter off. My codependency also made it hard to leave. But yeah, being back kind of in the dirt of people's lives, like I'm in the rhythm. Like, okay, I'm functioning as your coach to help you with transformation. Some people, they hire me for a season, and some people are like, yeah, I'm probably going to need this consistently. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of fit both categories. When I find people who are lacking meaning and purpose, it's usually at a pivot point in their life. So for your listeners, this would be a way to get ahead of it. If you have any listeners who are going to be empty nesters soon, their kids are junior, senior year, whatever, their last kid, when it comes, there's a lot of loss. And when that last kid leaves the home, this is especially true for moms. They had a degree, whether they were working moms, part-time, full-time, or not working moms, there's a degree of responsibility they felt for that child. Yeah. When that child leaves home, it's loss. Yeah. And it often affects meaning and purpose. If you have a health crisis, it often says to somebody, wait, I was doing this, working for the man or whatever else, but that doesn't have any meaning for me anymore. I now just stare at death in the eyes, and I need something different. People who have a lot of wealth, sometimes like, I just cashed out, or I sold the company or whatever else. And, I've been playing golf for the last 6 months, but I don't really want to do that. And when you lack meaning and purpose, if you get bored, that's often where you have most of your trouble. Mm-hmm. So I have a friend, Stephen Mansfield. I don't know if you know Stephen. So he works in DC, and he's got a company there and a company here. But he says, guys who tend to fall apart in their lives, and you can walk through even some of the big names, presidents and whatever else, they got bored. Yeah. They weren't challenged anymore. Yep. So having a sense of like, why am I on the planet? What imprint do I want to leave? If you don't have answers to those questions, life can really be hard. Mm-hmm. So my job is to come and ask really good questions. Mm-hmm. So when I meet somebody, that's what I do. Yeah. And people can read more about that at jamiegeorge.com, right? That's your website. Yeah. jamiegeorge.com. Sure. They can check that out. How about people that feel kind of stuck? They need something new. They need something different. They need new hope. Maybe they just kind of feel stuck. Yeah. What would be some of your words of encouragement, or some steps maybe they could take? So if you're stuck in your marriage, my first book was actually, it's called Love Well, Living Life Unrehearsed. And the whole thing is about how to get unstuck. So literally each chapter is like a step in getting unstuck in life, but especially in marriage. The whole thing's set up. Angie and I tell the story of when we were planning Journey, our marriage was on the rocks. Mm. So it was like the church is growing and we're dying. So we kind of tell that story. And it's on Amazon. So that's super, super practical. Love Well. But if you're kind of across the board, if you're like, I need something, start with questions. I'll give you another exercise too, maybe even before the questions, because you have to get what's stuck out. So you hit a glass ceiling, or you don't have any words. Clarity is power. Language gives you clarity, which gives you power. And by power, I mean a sense of well-being, a sense of identity, a sense of knowing who you are, how you're showing up in the world, how to orient yourself. So the anxiety comes from, I don't know how to orient myself. I don't know who I am in this space. So Julia Cameron, in The Artist's Way, which is a wonderful book, she does a thing called morning pages. So what she says is, get up in the morning. And so if you feel stuck, this is super easy. I mean, talk about low barrier. Get up in the morning, do it like, you could type it on your computer, or just do it on a piece of paper. Like just get one of those yellow notebooks and just, in a morning page is you write whatever's on your mind. There are no rules. I'm writing in my notebook. I'm hungry. My stomach is growling. I really could go for a cup of coffee. And why in the world did she say that to me last night? Who does she think she is to say that to me? I'm not sure we're going to pay the bill for that. What's the credit card number? How much do I owe? That faucet is leaking, I think. Who is God? Will my child come back to me when she's older? We need to buy her a new pair of jeans. Like whatever's on your mind, get it out. There's something powerful about getting what's going on, spinning around in your mind down onto the paper. Now, Julia's thing is like, don't even read it, throw the paper out. That the exercise itself of literally just putting it on paper is therapeutic in and of itself.
Yep.
It's clearing the mechanism, so to speak, so that you can see what you need to see. So I agree with that. Now, there's variations on that. You might read it back and have some insight, and some people use it for other things. But that's just super easy. Like just get I'm not motivated. I want to lay around in bed. I've got the malaise. Okay, try that. But otherwise, I would just start with some questions. What bothers you most about the world? Start with what bothers you the most. What should be different? If you kind of find the angst, and then flip it. What gives you the greatest joy? When do you feel closest to heaven on earth? So let's do a quick exercise, you and me. So we're sitting down, we're having coffee, and you're like, man, I just feel stuck. So we'll start with the first one. So Kent, for you, when do you go, I think I was created for this. Like I feel closest to heaven on earth when I am what?
Yeah. Closest to heaven on earth is when I am on a horseback in Colorado.
Why?
Because I am close to nature and I'm experiencing like the majestic beauty of creation all around me.
All right.
I feel close to God. I feel close to nature. And I feel like I can show up for people better if I have some of that.
Talk about the word close.
I feel when I'm in that setting, I feel that, I guess I feel close to, my thoughts feel clearer. I feel closer to God. I feel like it's kind of like a thin place. Like I feel like it's a thin place between heaven and earth.
Yeah. Does this word resonate at all? Is there an intimacy in it all?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
An intimacy, if you break that down, intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
So you feel deeply seen by the divine, and you feel like you're seeing him. There's some kind of recognition in the beauty of it all, in the slowing, in the stillness, in the power of being on horseback. I mean, you're in a beast that's powerful. There's something kind of raw and primal about that.
I'm in control.
There's a little control there. Are you really?
A little bit, but not too much.
Right. Because at any moment, that horse.
That's right.
I do a lot of horseback riding
I
too.
like that too. I like that.
You like a little of the risk.
100%.
Oh, yeah.
That's living,
that's part
man.
Of it. There's the adventure.
Exactly.
All right, beautiful. All right, what gets you? What irks you the most? What is the thing that if you're like, if this thing could be fixed or changed, or this should be different on the planet?
Self-centered people. Self-centered people. Like narcissistic, imposing their will on others. Self-centered.
Okay, so let's do a quick projection work. Go inside, shadow work. Do you ever find that lurking in you?
I've already been there. Yes. The answer is yes, I do. You're right.
Yeah, right.
You're exactly right.
So one of the reasons it bothers you is because it's something you feel the darkness of it all.
Yes.
Like I don't want it in me, but it also shows up in my irritation with other people.
I hate it when I see it because I know it's in there.
Yeah. Okay, so let's put both of those next to each other. And if anybody's listening, they take themselves through this same process. Let's put them both next to each other. And and I'll use different modalities. Like I might be like, hey, draw a picture of that. I'm not a great artist. Okay, draw it left-handed. Or draw it whatever your non-dominant hand is. Draw it, because we know you're not an artist and you don't have to grade it. It's just, you're just sketching a thing. Or if you like words, put that into words. Put that in, So act it out if you need to. Just somehow show it to me or show it to yourself. So let's put those two things on the table. We got the one, I'll just say it in words. We've got the one is, man, this slowing, this kind of primal part of nature, but the risk of being on horseback, being in these wide open spaces, really connected, grounded to God. This other, gosh, I wish people were less self-centered. I wish would this be fair? I wish they could get grounded and feel deeply connected to God.
Yeah, that is fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what would it look like to build your life around these two things that seem really unusual about Kent? Other people might have them, but not everybody does. So this is you. You're a light in the world, uniquely showing through your story. What, if we were to give this thing some direction, what might you do with your life? What would it look like for you to have purpose around these two things? How would you want to spend your time?
Well, I mean, I'm not trying to plug or come up with an obvious answer here, but I mean, the podcast would make the list.
Yeah.
Because I have put a fair amount of thought into that this year. Because I think what you can do with the podcast, you can learn, like I'm learning a lot, but then I also get to hone my communication skills. I also get to learn about better communication and those types of things, which then helps with other people and working with them. And you can have it's a good mix of having some adventure, but then also, learning things that you incorporate. So yeah, I mean, aside from owning a ranch, which I think needs to happen at some point.
Yeah.
I mean, I would think the podcast would be one.
So the podcast now gives you a place of purpose and meaning because I get to actually, that shadow work, I get to kind of do some of my own work in real time.
Exactly.
Because I'm going to learn about me. So I get to learn while I'm in this process. But I also get to show some of that to other people, and perhaps they'll be less selfish, self-centered, and absorbed. And they might do some internal work. They might get curious about themselves. Yes, exactly. And they might be just a little bit better parent that day, or they might be a better spouse that day. Or
yes.
They might just shine a little light on the world.
Yes. That's it.
Is that fair?
That's very fair.
Okay.
That's it.
So then I might finish this with, so I have like an 8-week program I do. I'm condensing a lot into a very fast session. But if we condense that and we were to say, hey, put a couple words around that, we'd create some mission around it, and then turn it into a mantra or an affirmation or a prayer, but something to repeat. So just give me 3 or 4 words as we talked about all that would be, these words resonate when I think about that.
Yeah, I have 3 teed up for you already.
Oh, look at you. What's up?
Enjoy.
Like
what do people enjoy? Because I think there's a lot of insight there, and what do I enjoy? Believe, what do you believe? Like, what do you believe to be true? Because that dictates action. So like, believe is a big thing. And my beliefs have changed about different things through the years, and it's had a direct impact then on how I live my life and the decisions I make. And build. And that's not necessarily in the right order, I guess. I'd probably go enjoy, build, believe, but build. Like, what are you building? You don't have to be a builder. Like for me, in the past, it was various businesses and ventures and those types of things. Well, I'm also building my family, I'm involved at church. We're trying to build that together, So I think the enjoy, build, and believe, I don't know how you tie it in like a sentence structure or whatnot, but those would be 3 words.
Yeah.
That I would say that's what the podcast is about. If we really kind of bring it down, I think you could kind of anchor it or hang it off of those 3 words. So,
all right. So if someone was listening and they were to take themselves through this process, again, they're going to ask, hey, this is what irks me, or this is what frustrates me in the world. This is what I feel closest to heaven on earth. They follow this process. Then they try and they get some more languaging like we just did. Then there might be some story in it, metaphor if they need it. Then we drop it down to 3 words. Then you could say it. Here's a little frame they could use. So I want to, or I am, or I will. So it just makes it personal, gives it some ownership and responsibility, right? So Kent, if I'm Kent, I might say something like, I am here to enjoy, believe, and build, and then add some language to it. People's lives, an experience for others. So you just add a little piece to that. So Jamie, I'm here to alleviate suffering, and bind up the brokenhearted, the wounds of the brokenhearted. Alleviate suffering, bind up the wounds of the brokenhearted. If I do those two things, it's a great day.
You're true to yourself. Yeah.
True to me.
Yeah.
So that we just kind of did a real quick exercise.
Yeah, that's great.
But,
Thank you.
Yeah, but if somebody feels stuck, that's not a bad, again, and if they're like, yeah, that didn't work, I often spend a lot more time for people who are really in the concrete of like, my feet are, I've been stuck for weeks, months, years.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure if you have an 8-week course, then obviously there's no way you can just walk through what you do in 8 weeks in 5 minutes. But I don't think too many people are going to listen to that and be like, I don't get anything from that. And that was helpful. And I don't think it was helpful just because it was, you and I that were working through it. I think that's...
Well, we find ourselves in other people's stories, right?
Exactly.
That's why we watch movies. It's why we read literature.
Yes.
We find ourselves there.
Yes.
That's the beauty of the Bible, I think.
I know you have to get out of here. So for sure you're going to have to be back on at some point in the future again. But I'd love to hear just a little bit about the human experience because it looks really fascinating. I know COVID sort of threw a challenge in the mix there. But my understanding is Paul's helping out a little bit with that. And Paul Farmer is one of my 2 favorite designers ever. I mean, he's a master.
Freakishly gifted.
He's freakishly gifted. What are you doing with the human experience?
So the idea behind the human experience was, what if we could create a space? This was a live show. What if we create a show? And show might not be the right term, but we'll use it for now because it will evolve. We only did one, so we just.
I thought you did 2.
No. We did 2 nights.
Okay.
Because of COVID.
Oh, okay.
But we've only done one.
Okay.
So the idea was, what if we could create something where we just say, hey, look, we're all having a human experience, which immediately the phrase itself kind of removes the judgment.
Yeah.
You're just having a human experience. I'm struggling with cancer. I got my girlfriend pregnant. I had a huge success in business. So like whatever the thing is, like, okay, you're having a human experience. Life comes to us as our teacher. What are you learning? It pulls all the judgment of like, you did what and how come and the consequences and like, all right, what are you learning from it? And we might be able to learn something too. So the concept was, we have tons of musician friends who are like, well, let's do some music, we'll put some music in it, and that'll be part, so we just kind of have some beat change, and it'd be, it'll be fun. But it would really revolve around a story. Like, let's take somebody's story, and how has their human experience taught them something powerful about life? And so, with each story, every story has every story has multiple crises, but we tend to all look back and go, I had this pivotal moment in my life. So at the human experience, we're going to go, let's tell the story about a pivotal moment that dramatically changed the trajectory of someone's life. Because that means it was transformative. They had a paradigm shift. Life was going like this, trajectory changed because X. Let's tell the story of that, and then come tell us how are things different since then? Because how many times you've talked to people who've been some horrible thing, like, I wouldn't go through it again, but man, I'm so glad it happened.
Yeah, almost every time.
Everybody says that something about suffering teaches us something. So we tell the story, and kind of what was neat at the human experience is, for our first one, we tell this wonderful story, this incredible story, and then at the end of the story, go, by the way, this is a true story, and by the way, Rufus Howe is with us tonight. Would you welcome him to the stage? So, so now you actually get to see the person, and he gets to tell a little bit about what it was like. So I've been a storyteller for years. I love telling stories. So I get to tell the story in a compelling way, hopefully, if I do my job, and then we get to meet the real person. And then probably the twist when we finally bring the thing back online, what we'll add to it is probably, I've been doing so much coaching, is we'll probably add some coaching to it. Okay, this person struggled with X. Anybody relate to that? Who's out there dealing with it? Anybody want to talk about that tonight? And I'll literally go into the audience and let's go. Like if you were there and you went, hey, I'm dealing with a thing with my kids. Can you help me? Or I feel stuck. And we might do because when you listen in on someone sharing their thing vulnerably, first of all, it's connection and vulnerability. And then secondly, it's not that different from all of us at one level. So you're like,
yes,
I didn't have words for that, but that's actually totally what I'm dealing with.
Yes.
And validation is often one of the biggest things that gets us unstuck. Oh, not just me?
Exactly.
Because the great lie is I'm the only one dealing with this.
Yes.
So
I don't get goosebumps very often, but when you said incorporating that coaching aspect, I can see it, man, because you can pull it off. And that's a proven model because Tony Robbins does that.
Oh, he's the master.
And Tony Robbins is a master.
Yeah, he's the master.
And there needs to be more. I have no idea what his faith, what his beliefs are, but there needs to be more of that with people of your belief and faith.
Yeah.
But you also need to understand human behavior, which you do. Dude, I love that.
Thank you.
Love that.
Well, thank you. I'll pass that on to Paul because that needs to happen. That's where we want to go with
it. That needs to happen because the other thing that I just believe so much, and this is why it's so important to pay attention, because when you hear someone talk about their deal, there's principles that you can extrapolate every time.
Yes.
You might not have done that. You might not be a singer or whatever, but you can learn from that. So that's what's going to happen with your deal because people are going to, understand they're not alone as they hear other people talk through it, but they're going to extrapolate principles from that. And then you're together rubbing shoulders with people, and then you're incorporating storytelling and music. Dude, that sounds amazing.
Thank you.
Is that just jamiegeorge.com as well? If
yeah,
that gets
you
kicked
can find
back
out.
up?
Yes, yeah,
okay.
You can find a lot about it right there.
Okay,
yeah.
All right. I got to get you out of here real quick, though. What are we, October, what is it, Andrew? October the 19th right now when we're recording this. Monday, October 19th. Elections coming up. We talked a little bit about the chaos that's going on in the country, the polarization, the lack of nuance, all of these types of things. What would you want to leave our listeners with? Just a final thought kind of in closing. Anything come to mind?
You're going to be okay. You're already loved.
I don't think we can top that. Jamie George, thank you for being on.
Good to see you, brother.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for the invitation.
You bet. Let me get a picture of you real quick.
Yeah.